Welcome to the sixth episode of the Mendez Movie Report Podcast, covering film news that caught my interest for the week of June 1st, 2026. I am your host and namesake film critic, Luis A. Mendez. If you want to check out more of my work, you can visit mendezmoviereport.com or find me on all social media, whether it be Letterboxd, X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Reddit, or even Award Expert and Gold Derby, all under Mendez Movie RPT. And if you ever want to shoot me an email, just shoot it at author, like a writer, author L Mendez at gmail.com. And this is going to be a very interesting episode because it will be the first time that I am able to talk about and unveil my Oscar projections, my initial Oscar projections for the 99th Academy Awards, which of course will cover the best in film for the year 2026. Also in this episode, I will be reacting to a very interesting Cynthia Erivo variety interview. Paddington 4 has gotten a surprising hire from one of its writers. I do have thoughts regarding apparently Star Wars episodes 10 to 12 potentially being in development. Marcia Lucas's legacy. She recently passed away. I want to touch on that really quick. And of course, the latest in box office news from the past and upcoming weekend, and a little bit of streaming as well. And, this ended up being a generally quiet week with the exception of all the buzz and talk regarding Backrooms box office and what's been and the ridiculous box office that's been going on with Obsession, where it's literally gone up weeks 2 and week 3. I don't get it. I'm already on record that I did not like that movie, but it is definitely potentially the box office story of the year. We have to keep an eye out on that. But obviously, I honestly wouldn't have had much material for this episode were it not for the fact that I did happen to release my initial Oscar projections, and we will get to that. Really quick before we get the show started, yes, I'm still want to get an intro out. I'm in a position where I might be able to finally get that done sooner than later, but I promise we're going to keep building. We're going to keep growing. The show's going to get better. Like I said, we're going to start this from the ground up and do my best for my vision of a weekly podcast that kind of just goes over the last week and such regarding anything that I wrote over on my Substack. But without further ado, we may as well get this episode officially going. All right, here we go. Here we go. It is now time, finally, to announce my initial projections for the 99th Annual Academy Awards. I've been an Oscar observer since I was in 4th grade during the big Titanic sweep season of 1997. The first Academy Awards ceremony that I watched from start to finish was the 2002 edition, when Chicago outran a late surgeon, the pianist. I started writing about and predicting the Oscars during the 2021 season. Though technically I dipped my toes a little bit during the tail end of the 2020 season. And previously I had posted all my predictions on the Substack while saving more in-depth analysis over at Ordinary Times. Well, starting now, it's going to be exclusively over on my Substack. So you can read that if you want, if you haven't yet. But I'm going to go through what I wrote there, and then I'm going to go into some more details about the best picture projections that I have and why I have them that way. Last year I pulled off something I never thought I'd be able to do, in that I correctly predicted the eventual Best Picture winner, one battle after another, from the previous May all the way through Oscar night. And entering the 2026 season, I've already got a lovely concoction of personal stress over how I'm going to top that feat, mixed with the volatility of trying to figure out exactly what the Best Picture lineup will look like at such an insanely early stage in the race. In the past, I usually got my initial projections out before the Cannes Film Festival. And this year, I decided not to rush things and instead wait until the festival wrapped up. At Cannes, Neon continues a streak of winning the top prize with its top priority, the family courtroom drama Fjord. However, other national films such as the queer period epic The Black Ball, the philosophical All of a Sudden, from Best Picture nominee Drive My Car's Ryusuke Hamaguchi, the post-World War II period piece Fatherland, from Best Director nominee Paul Polakowski, the World War One period piece Coward, and the dark nihilistic Minotaur also emerge as potential contenders. As for non-can factors, Amazon's Project Hail Mary released just a few weeks after the previous Oscar ceremony and went on to become both a critically and financial success while still holding on to some of the strongest audience scores of the year so far. In fact, the strongest audience scores of the year so far. The film has all the makings of the kind of big studio populist blockbuster that sneaks into the lineup, but this year also features several other major studio genre films all fighting for the same lane. Which brings us to the front runner at this stage. And picking out one was much harder for me to call right now than it was last year. Last year it was super easy. It was like, you know what? PTA has this new movie coming out. It's going to hit on things that are going on in our politics right now. It could end up being a Venerian Vice, but if it hits, this could be the movie of the year, and that's basically the way things ended up playing out. It's a little harder this year because on paper, Christopher Nolan's Odyssey has all the ingredients to be win competitive, but it's also been 2 decades since a director helmed more than one Best Picture winner. So the film is going to have to truly blow away critics and audiences in a way the Academy will have no choice but to give Nolan the top prize twice in just 4 years. That's where I hesitate because it's one thing to pull off winning Best Picture again, but to do it just twice within 4 years. But nevertheless, against my better judgment, I've got Nolan's next epic as my initial movie to beat, followed by a board of 50 films that I currently consider to be in the race for a Best Picture nomination. Their chances range from movies simply waiting for an opportunity to open up, all the way to films that already seem right on the verge of making the predicted 10. History tells us the lineup of 10 nominees will usually feature 2 or 3 blockbuster films and 1 or 2 international titles. My current predicted lineup arguably includes more of the former than it probably should, and a tad less of the latter. And look, I will admit, I'm personally more fond of populist fields like 2022 or 2024 than cinephile-centric fields like 23 or 25. Now, so my bias might be showing a little bit in my initial predicted 10. Still, I would be surprised if my current lineup goes 10 for 10. Based on past history, I was predicting post-canting past years. I'd say at least half of these are likely on the money, which I guess is a decent start with so much time left to go. We do still have the rest of the summer blockbuster season to see if any major populist contenders emerge. We still have the fall festivals where plenty of contenders will screen for the first time. We still have the big holiday season where studio releases can make major waves. It is still very early, and by the next time I check in shortly after July 4th weekend, I already expect things to have shifted dramatically as the season continues, and these films spend the rest of the year jockeying for position in the race to make the final predicted lineup. Until then, you'll find my board of 50 possible Best Picture contenders coming from me as I get through all 50 of them and explain why I picked them like that. Look, like the protagonists in our current frontrunner, we still have a long journey ahead of us, and it will be exciting to see where everything lands by the end. So let's get this started. 5 tiers, 50 movies. What does the Best Picture race look like for the 99th Oscars? here after the Cannes Film Festival has come and gone. What does it look like right now as we begin this journey? All right. Now we could be a little less formal here and talk here about the 50 movies that I have on my board right now. Now I will tell you, um, that even just a few days since I've gotten this up, published the projections officially where I have to, that there's already a little bit of things that are changing in the background, but I'm not gonna get, complicate things, and I'm gonna go through the projections as they were published. And the first tier are what do I currently predict gets nominated for Best Picture, and this is what I can really compare to when we finally get noms on that January morning. But at number one, I have The Odyssey. It's it's probably a default pick at the moment. It's not a pick I'm super confident in. It's I don't feel right saying that that's her next Best Picture winner. If Oppenheimer didn't win, it'd be a different story. But because Oppenheimer won, and again, we have not seen someone direct two Best Picture winners in now two. It's getting out to the last. I believe the last guy to do it was Clint Eastwood with Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby. You know, I don't have confidence I will see it 2 times in 4 years, but at the moment, with all these movies you could argue about, it just seems on paper like the most plausible thing. And thankfully, we should get some answers around early to mid-July about the movies, how much of a serious contender it is. But I will say, the trailer and everything I've seen so far does make me think it has the goods to getting to Best Picture at the very least. On number 2, we have Digger. And this is Alejandro Inarritu's next movie. Tom Cruise is going to be leading it. Now, the word on the street is that this will be coming in the fall. It may or may not get a fall festival showing, but it's coming in the fall. Warner Brothers is hoping that Tom Cruise alone can get people to show up, and they will be running a campaign for it, but they technically see Dune 3 as their number one contender. So why do I have it as high as number 2 at the moment? Well, because I have a source that goes to a lot of test screenings, and they generally have tastes that are closer to the Academy than not. Not necessarily as close as to someone like me does, but closer than your average like film Twitter person. And right now, their favorite movie of the year is Project Hail Mary. Their number 2 is Digger. And some of you who are deeply involved in Letterboxd and some of the big accounts on there might know who I'm talking about. And that says something to me. And on top of that, if we think Tom Cruise is winning Best Actor, well, if he's winning Best Actor, like you historically, it either their movie has to be a massive box office hit, or it has to be win competitive for Best Picture. It has to be like at least top 3. I mean, like who was it that won in 29? Excuse me, in 2019. Joaquin Phoenix wins. Joker was a huge box office success. 20. Hopkins, The Father was number 2. I believe was number 2 in Best Picture. 21. Will Smith. King Richard was a modest hit. It was I think it was around close to a top 5 contender. 22. Brendan Fraser with The Whale. That movie was a box office success. 23. Cillian Murphy and Oppenheimer. That won Best Picture. 24. Adrian Brody for The Brutalist. Brutalist was number 3 in Best Picture. It may even you could even make an argument it might have actually been number 2. And then last year, Michael B. Jordan for Sinners. Sinners was number 2 in Best Picture. So at the moment, if Tom Cruise is going to win Best Actor, I have to put this pretty high. Wild Horse 9, I have a number 3. Martin McDonagh. This potentially, because I will say Gerald over at the Awards Garage currently has this predicted as the Best Picture winner, and I think he's might have a good case because we are talking about the potential for the idea that it's Martin McDonagh's time. It could hit. The trailer seems to hint that it could be dealing on certain things politically that might be of the moment. But I will say my only concern is that watching this trailer, it does seem to be more commercial compared to some of his other stuff that's gotten awards attention. So I gotta keep an eye out on that. And on top of that, Searchlight does have another movie out there that I will talk about here later that could potentially be a dark horse to compete to get in to Best Picture. The Black Ball at number 4, I have The Black Ball, which is obviously was the massive Cannes hit. It's quite frankly easily my most anticipated of the Cannes titles. Everything I heard, this is an epic, sprawling piece. It is a crowd pleaser, and it has the potential to be, an international entry. Now, on number 5, I have Sense and Sensibility for Focus. Focus Features has been very mysterious about their priorities this year compared to other years, which kind of feels like the place Searchlight was at this point last year, which is not good considering Searchlight had a disastrous awards campaign season last year. Even though the movies they were campaigning I thought were good slate. One of them ended up being my best of the year list, and I had two others that came close. But at the moment, it just makes sense to just go with Sense and Sensibility because it is coming out in October. It's probably going to be showing at the fall festivals. If it does well, I can see it being a hit. This is a story the Academy historically likes. It's been in Best Picture before. And it will be interesting to see how this one's received. So at the moment, considering how good Focus is at getting movies into Best Picture, I do have this in as their top priority for now. At number 6, I have Project Hail Mary, which if I were basing this on pure confidence, I would have this higher, but I'm trying to figure out where it would probably land when we get to the final ballot. I think at the moment it would probably be around that number 5, number 6 borderline spot, like where Wicked was in 24. It's this movie. I'm already starting to see some people try to discount and say, "Oh, people are forgetting about this movie and haven't thought about this movie and all this other stuff." This movie is going to remain in the conversation. The audience scores for this movie are insane. 4.3 on Letterboxd, high 90s on Rotten Tomatoes, A Cinema score 8s on IMDb last I checked. That's not nothing. Do not worry. And Amazon does plan to do a lot of rescreenings on IMAX as we get to the end of the year. This will be Amazon's top priority. So I have no issue still putting Project Hail Mary in my predicted 10. And am I biased because it is so far my favorite movie of the year? Yeah, maybe. But I mean, I just think the audience scores speak for themselves. Fjord, I have a number 7. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the discourse around this movie. And there is another Neon title that could potentially get more passion behind it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Does this slip up to just becoming an acting vehicle? We'll have to see. But Neon does know how to get some of these prickly films into Best Picture. And everything that I've heard is that this is their top priority right now. I would be very interested to see, because I got to think that the game plan is to release this at the fall festivals and then show it at the have it come out around November time or something like that, to the theaters. So I think that's probably the way they're going to do it, the way they did with Sentimental Value. It'll be really interesting to see how say a TIFF audience reacts to this, because Sentimental Value got into the TIFF international slate. I have Social Reckoning at number 8. This it's a bit of a gamble from me because this could end up being a disaster. Um, but the Academy really likes Sorkin stuff. I like Sorkin stuff more than other people I know do, and my tastes tend to be closer to the Academies and not. So I do think, based on what I've heard of the trailer that was shown at CinemaCon, that this could have the goods to get in. Now, at number 9, I do have Disclosure Day from Steven Spielberg, and I actually almost didn't put this in here at number 9, but the early reactions have been too good to ignore. Now, could it be BS? Because I remember really good reactions for Gladiator 2, and while Gladiator 2 is one of my faves of that year, it is a divisive movie. It got divisive reviews. Audience scores are good, but not great. I know some people who outright loathe that movie. Um, so those early reactions were, led us astray. You could argue that early reactions kind of led us astray for Wicked for Good. So I would like to calm down on that. And I do wonder what this movie's box office is going to look like because Steven Spielberg just does not sell the way he used to. But um if this movie is as good as they say, and we know there is a contingent in the Academy that a Spielberg movie comes out and 9 out of 10 times they're like, oh, that's my favorite movie of the year. I would say I don't mind having this as sort of a default number 9 at the moment. We'll see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if it just ends up a tech thing. And again, there ain't no way all these blockbusters, all these sci-fi films are going to get in. But I need to see who, I need a process of elimination to see who doesn't make it. And at number 10, I have Doom Part 3. And of course, the big question is, after last year's debacle with Wicked for Good and Avatar Fire and Ash, are we setting ourselves up here with Doom Part 3? I think it's a difference in that Wicked for Good ended up having an issue where it started getting super, super commercialized and leaning into the fact that it's an IP. Avatar Fire and Ash lost that feel of something special and started to feel more of like, oh, this is a franchise, this is a series, and all these conversations about a fourth and a fifth movie coming out. And I think that took the luster off of those two movies. And with all due respect to John M. Chu, who I forever am grateful that he's gone on the run that he's gone on, starting with Crazy Rich Asians, even though I do worry about some of these upcoming projects he's got coming up. He is not Denis Villeneuve. And Denis Villeneuve has found a way to keep these two movies feeling like they have the gravitas of a auteur type of blockbuster. And that's very, very important. But this reportedly will be Warner Brothers' top priority. I played around in my head with saying screw it and putting this at number 1 because there is a world this ends up going on some Return of the King style run. There is a world that happens. But and Warner Brothers has been super aggressive. The very next day after the Oscars, they had this big event revealing the trailer. They clearly are going for it in trying to make this the next Return of the King. We are seeing the end of an incredibly well-regarded trilogy, but there is a world that the movie gets okay, not great reviews, and it ends up just being a tech thing. And we saw what happened with Doom Part 2. Better critical and audience scores, better box office, all of that, better than the first movie, and it still got less than noms. And whereas the first movie was probably like number 5, number 6 for Best Picture, Doom Part 2 was probably like number 7, number 8. So, but for now, I'm going to be cautiously optimistic. And again, I want to see a process of elimination with these big studio films. And I'm going to be careful and have it in at number 10. All right. And now for tier 2, what I refer to as the on the bubble contenders. At number 11, I have Cry to Heaven. Everybody has probably already heard about this new Tom Ford film. I believe it's already been in production. I think it's already post production. I had heard someone mention they knew someone who saw a test screening for it, and they had a glowing reaction to it. This is an Anne Rice film, but not one of her horror films. It's a queer epic. Tom Ford has been kind of knocking on the door of getting a movie that gets into Best Picture. By the way, it's wild to me that a fashion guy is a great director, but we barely get any movies from him. This, I think, has a chance to be massive, but because we don't know if it comes out this year, we don't know who's the distributor. There's a lot of questions about it. I couldn't quite pull the trigger, so I have it at number 11. At number 12, I have Jack of Spades, which is Joel Cohen's upcoming period movie, which is going to be a mystery. There are rumors that Focus Features is on the verge of picking it up, which would be huge and probably make me want to switch that with Sense and Sensibility as Focus's top priority. I will keep an eye out on that. At 13, the untitled Jesse Eisenberg musical comedy that we keep people. I think the rumor is that it might be called No One Cares. Supposedly it has screened. I'm not sure if it was positively well received or not. At number 14, I have Club Kid, the big can, which was one of the can standouts. It's about this gay man running a club, finds out he actually has a kid, and I guess the story is supposed to be that it turns out the kid actually knows his music. And I've heard this is a crowd pleaser. I've seen some people say that this is a Nora. I will keep an eye out on this. If the passion's there and the Eisenberg musical doesn't hit like A24 is hoping for it to. Being Human, which is about a deaf activist who did a massive protest. This is going to be from Sean Heater, who did Coda, and Apple is backing it. So I have that at number 15. And then we got a couple of can titles. All of a sudden at 16, Fatherland at 17, Coward at 18, Minotaur at 19. All of a sudden it's a neon thing. The other ones that I mentioned are Movie. I do think Movie has a chance to get back into this after. I still to this day have no idea what made them think that Die My Love was going to get into Best Picture, but I think they have a better slate. I don't think they've hit the kind of fun, super passionate pick that The Substance was for them 2 years ago. But I think they have a chance to get in here with their movies. It's all going to depend on what emerges as the international picks. All of a sudden, this gets seen as lesser Drive My Car. That's something that we have to look out for, or is the passion there? Can people sit through 3 hours plus of people talking about life and death? Fatherland, Politskowski's got a movie in there before. Can he do it again? Coward is just going to be seen as lesser the Black Ball, with given that Black Ball is mainly focused on some stuff regarding World War One. Coward Coward I think is also World War One. So no. Excuse me. Coward's World War One. Black Ball is more closer to World War Two. And I've heard Minotaur is kind of a nihilistic, mean movie, so I don't know. I don't know if that'll do it. And at number 20, I have The Adventures of Cliff Booth, which, hey, this was getting positioned by Netflix to be a potential look. I mean, like they moved this from the summer to the fall. Like if they're serious about this potentially being a contender. So I think it's a wild card that you have to keep an eye out. That's why I do barely have it on the bubble at the moment. All right, now time for tier 3, the dark horses on the cusp of being taken seriously. At number 21, I have Michael from Lionsgate. And this is going to be a very interesting test because this movie is making crazy amounts of money. The audience scores for this movie are so high that even on Letterboxd, with a younger crowd, a more cinephile-centric crowd, a crowd that usually agrees with critics more than audiences, even there, it's at the moment at a 3.6. But the thing is that really good audience scores can be a sign of a movie's potential, but you do still need to have a little bit of that critic push of, hey, this is what the industry needs to be prioritizing on top of their screener piles. No, on top of their screener piles. They're not going to be doing that with Michael. Michael, the last movie to have a Rotten Tomato score as bad as Michael's and getting to Best Picture was 1953's The Robe. And the problem with that is that that's being pushed by modern reviews. The Robes among contemporary critics was actually a top 3 film if you look at the data of contemporary 1953 Best of the Year list. So it's got an uphill climb. And if we get to award season and this thing can't even get into like HCA or CCA, and there ain't no way the Golden Globes are going to touch this thing past, I don't know, maybe they give Jafar Jackson the nomination for his act for comedy musical or whatever acting. It's cooked if it can't do that, because I do not think critics are going to push this, even compared to other not criticky beloved movies. I don't think that critics are going to push this. At number 22, we have The Rivals of the Side King, which got a great reception. I think it was Sundance and South by Southwest last year, but apparently the producers got cocky with what money they wanted, and they ended up having to settle with Black Bear, who is brand new at distributing, and they're still trying to get their feet from out under them. Christie was supposed to be their big thing last year. That thing floundered. I mean, like it got okay reviews and okay audience scores, but like they didn't even get a Golden Globe nom. When it was all said and done, all that happened was Sydney Sweeney got an Astronom. And In the Gray, which was supposed to be a commercial play with Guy Ritchie, that ended up bombing. And Tuner's a great film, and it seems to be doing okay at the specialty box office, but it's not making much noise. So it's going to be interesting what they can do with Rivals of Messiah King. They're going to be coming out with it in August. I don't know about that strategy, but that's what they're going to try to do. At number 23 is Josephine, which was this year's big thing at Sundance. And it is getting picked up by Sumerian Pictures, which is a super small, brand new distributor. And that's a big get for them, given that they got how much hype there was around this movie for Sundance. But I just don't know if it's going to get the love. I mean, we'll see if they get this out. I need to double check when the release schedule for this is. But if they're going to get this out at fall festivals, they probably should, if they really want to get people talking and revitalize conversation about this movie. We do have The Uprising at number 24. That's a movie about the peasants' rebellion against King Richard II. Paul Greengrass directing this. I think this is a sneaky dark horse for Focus Features. Werewolf at number 25. The upcoming Robert Eggers film. I do think it's going to get labeled as lesser Nosferatu. It's even coming out in the same. It's got some of the same cast. It's coming out during the same time period. So I have it at number 25, even though Nosferatu was arguably a top 15 movie. Obsession I have at number 26, and I talked about this on X. Look, I don't like this movie. I do not want to see this movie get into Best Picture. But the fact is that this movie's audience scores speak for themselves. They are ridiculously high for horror. And I can't ignore this. I can't ignore how good the audience scores are for Obsession. And at this point last year, I had F1 at number 25. So, and Train Dreams at number 35. So you have to take it. It's May. As I record this is May for now. You're listening, this is June. It's still early. There's you never know if Focus Features, before you know it, realizes this is their money to get into Best Picture. Now, that being said, this is not a period piece like Nosferatu. Sinners, by the way, also talked about the Black experience. We tend to get at least one movie in Best Picture that talks about the Black experience. And Frankenstein. Those are all period pieces. Substance hits on something about the industry, and is a big hit with feminist voters. Because we usually tend to get like at least one feminist film for the ladies. It doesn't. It's not either of those. So it's gonna have to be weapons where there's a legitimate critic push for it, especially with Indy Navarrete. I hope I didn't butcher her name. Um, so it's gonna be interesting to see, like if Obsession can get into PGA, you have to take it seriously. At number 27, we have Behemoth, which is a film regarding musicians. The script did leak out to this, and it's available if you go seek it out. I There have been some test screenings for it. This, I think, is Searchlight Pictures' secret weapon in case Wild Horse 9 flops. Um, we do have Tony at number 28, and then Primetime number 29. One's about Anthony Bourdain. Another's about Chris Hansen during the To Catch a Predator stuff. Both from A24, both coming to fall. Both seem like commercial releases, but that might potentially get some acting play. So I'm going to keep an eye on those, especially if the young crowd comes out and these movies end up being box office hits. Now, at number 30, I did have Ink in regard to the rise of Rupert Murdoch and the beginning of his empire, but Ink, I have now learned, is going to be a 2027 thing, so we can already take that off the board. All right, now we are up to tier 4D long shots with a slim path. At number 31, I have A24's The Invite. This is apparently, from what I've heard or I've been told, this is a sort of more comedic quasi Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf situation. I don't know if this is going to be as crowd pleasing to audiences and voters as it might be to certain critics who seem to thrive on tragic romance. If this is a tragic romance, apparently this is like a straight up black comedy at the very least you can say. I haven't seen the movie for myself. It should be coming out. I believe it's coming out in the next few weeks. No, I think it's coming out this month. It's a long shot, but I do think that it's got a potential slim path if everything hits with it. At number 32, Saturn Return. This is Kuidar's follow up to Sing Sing, and he also was the guy who helped co-wrote Train Dreams. Netflix has this, so I'm keeping an eye on it. Possible Love, a potential international player for Netflix. A Long Winter at 34. This is following up from, I believe, Andrew Haigh, who's the director of All of Us Strangers, which sort of played with getting into the Oscars, but didn't quite make it in. It was in my personal ballot for screenplay. Really, really good movie that came close to making my best of the year consideration for that year. But this is follow up A Long Winter, so I'm keeping an eye out on that. Prima Facie at number 35, in which Cynthia Erivo plays a woman who has been defending men accused of rape, and I guess she unfortunately goes through a sexual assault, and she finds herself having to ask questions about who she's been defending before and stuff like that. This is, I believe, Jodie Comer played this on the West End, I believe, and was able to win an award for it. So I'm keeping an eye out on this. At number 36, I have my most anticipated film of the year, Godzilla Minus Zero. Now, what are the chances this gets into Best Picture? Super, super low. There would have to be an incredible perfect storm of things, especially with so many blockbusters this year fighting to get into Best Picture. But considering the last movie did what it did, even though I don't think it's going to replicate that, it's I gotta put it on the board as an outside shot. And on top of that, this is the only time potentially in my life that I can conceivably put a Godzilla movie on the board. So I'm gonna take advantage of that, even though it probably won't last by the time we get to the fall. At number 37, I Play Rocky. At number 38, Madden. Two Amazon biopics that will be coming out towards the end of the year. I have heard I Play Rocky has been playing pretty well, no pun intended, with test audiences. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. I've heard Amazon believes they can campaign that one. Madden, I'm hearing a little bit more rough stuff about. So we'll see how that plays out. At number 39, I do have Pressure. Which again I just saw, and I don't think it's gonna happen because the movie isn't really making that much noise. It looks like another one of those small, well-regarded, focused feature movies. Like I do think it'll probably show up on some best of the year list. It might show up on mine. Um, I think it's gonna get some BAFTA long list mentions. I can see it getting a Best British Film nomination, but I do think it's a very, very big long shot, barring an incredible collapse among all the other contenders. And I say the same thing about number 40, Tuner. Very well received movie's been doing generally well at the specialty box office, but I just don't think it's making quite the splash. I think you'll see it make a couple best of the year lists. You'll even see like some like debut feature sort of nominations or something in certain regional critic groups that if you know if they count it as a feature debut because the director had done documentaries before. I can see a very slim path for either of those two movies, but it does kind of feel like they came and didn't make as much noise as you probably wanted to see them make. And finally, we have tier 5D long shots that are looking for a path. There isn't even a slim path, in my opinion. They're just looking to see if they can find a path. And going on what I was saying about movies that kind of came, and I don't feel they made the noise that they have to be making. I can if I squint real hard, I can see a path for Pressure or Tuner. And granted, there might be some bias in me that I really, really like those movies, so maybe I'm being biased here, but I can see a path for those. I'm struggling to see a path with these others that I'm going to mention, but I don't want to completely discard them at this early in the season. We do have the drama at number 41, and there is some folks who are super passionate about this movie. I do think this is going to be a movie that you're going to see on some best of the year list. I wouldn't even be surprised if this is a movie that you see show up for best picture mention at some critic regional. Um, but I do have the drama at 41. I do feel hasn't really made the noise that I needed to, even though it's done good box office, but I just don't think it's gotten that awards gravitas. Paper Tiger at number 42, Hope at number 43, and I Love Boosters at number 44. All those are neon films. All those movies have been kind of well received, but not. I'm not getting vibes that it's a big awards contenders for any of those movies. In particular, with I Love Boosters, which quite frankly has not been doing great at the box office. The rumor was that Neon was kind of going to get this movie out and hope for everything everywhere style reaction. And they're not getting everything everywhere style reaction. It's not even getting the everything everywhere word of mouth. I've seen so many people who think that this is a downgrade from Sorry to Bother You. I haven't seen the movie yet. I keep trying to, but I haven't gotten around to it. But regardless of what happens with it, and it's so because I see Boots Riley really busting his ass out there to try to get the word out on this movie. And I do think there is a uncomfortable discussion to be had as to why is it that the two white filmmakers behind Obsession and Backrooms have seen better success than the black filmmakers behind Is God Is and I Love Boosters. But that's a prickly discussion that I don't feel qualified to get deeper into. Um, but I think Neon has bigger things that they can campaign for. So I think those three movies are still looking for a path. At number 45, we have Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. This is probably gonna have intense support among Jane Showbrun's biggest fans. I personally am 0-2 with their movies. It's a super long shot, but if the movie comes out and gets some kind of obsession like reception, you have to keep in mind the possibility. Rose at number 46, which was a hit at Berlin, but quite frankly, I haven't heard much other than that. Supposedly, Sandra Hüller's really good in it. A Man of His Time at number 47, even though I've heard very divisive things about that movie. Whale Fall at number 48, The Dog Stars at number 49, sort of the tail end of potential blockbuster films that maybe could find some awards buzz. And at number 50, I do have I Swear, which has some of the best audience scores of the year. It's a really, really good biopic, and I can see why BAFTA fell in love with it like they did. But at the end of the day, it did come out last year, technically for British voters. It does kind of it's going to feel sort of like last year's new for some voters, and I do wonder if it's going to be some voters who connected with the BAFTA controversy regarding the Tourette's, um, the man that I Swear is based on, having a Tourette's outburst while Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo were presenting at BAFTA. I do wonder it's going to leave a certain taste in certain voters' mouth that they don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole, which is unfortunate because it's a really good movie and a really good performance. But yeah, I have it at number 50. It's looking for a path, which is ironic because it is a generally well received movie. But that wraps it up right there. There's my Oscar projections. 50 movies I'm currently looking at. There will be movies that fall off from this. There will be movies that get on the board. There's might be a movie or two that I do not even know exists at the moment that I'm gonna have on the board and have on the board pretty high within a couple months. It's happened before. It can happen again. So let's see how this journey plays out. But this is my first official look at the Oscars, trying to predict them. This is the best picture outlook that I'm looking at. 50 movies across 5 tiers. Who's going to make it? We have until January to find out. All right. And in regard to film news from the last week, Cynthia Erivo gave a fascinating interview for Variety's Power of Women series. And I just want to touch on a couple of quotes here that really stood out to me. I will be leaving a link to this interview in the show notes. Please do check it out. Obviously, the folks at Variety are doing a lot of hard work to get this interview done. So I would prefer that you go link to the link and read it for yourself, instead of just going by what I'm some of the snippets I'm taking out here. But Cynthia Erivo, she's got an interesting year coming up because she does have a movie that is probably coming out this year called Prima Facie that I will actually be obviously we just had a conversation on regarding its best picture chances, and she may be in the running again for actress. But everybody knows about the massive Wicked for Good meltdown that happened last year during award season, and one of the things that was part of that was Cynthia Erivo kind of disappearing from the campaign trail compared to the year before. And I found some stuff fascinating here from the interview, and I just wanted to make sure that I highlighted some of this stuff. Regarding now, this is Cynthia Erivo regarding the jokes about and sort of dismissals regarding her relationship with her Wicked and Wicked for Good co-star Ariana Grande. There were a lot of conversations about, is this a creepy relationship between them? What's going on here? Are they really friends? Is this just for the movie? A bunch of stuff like that I personally found silly, but there have been all these ridiculous film essays and stuff like that online about it. The people who have getting to gossip and decide to have a target on this movie and its stars that leaned into it sometimes. But she said regarding this stuff, quote, "It's very interesting watching what people's perception is versus what the reality actually is. Lots of psychologists seated at home deciding who we were, what we were going through, what we were doing, and why. I think that people didn't really believe that we were actually friends, but that's also because people don't know me very well. If I'm a friend, then I'm a friend. If I'm not, then I'm not." I'm honestly not going to comment much on that, but I've never believed that this was all made up. There's even been like attempts to claim that something happened during the Wicked for Good sort of like campaigning and marketing stuff that they then drifted apart. I don't believe that one bit. I wouldn't even be surprised if they end up working together again one day. There is no possible I've just seen no evidence whatsoever that they're to make me believe that it was a publicity stunt. I think they're friends. They worked together a long time in two big movie projects. They were kind of a team together during that run where they got Oscar nominations. I'm with her on that. Now, regarding the incident at the Singapore premiere of Wicked for Good, which it's interesting that I actually once read that this sort of was like the beginning of the bad juju that would infect this movie. And in a weird way, I think I agree with them. But regarding the incident at the Singapore premiere, where Erivo ended up having to defend Grande from some ridiculous social media prankster who jumped the railing and tried to accost Grande and stuff. And apparently, this bozo's been known for like doing this at concerts and stuff like that. He actually was taken into custody, released, and then attempted to do this again I believe it was a Lady Gaga concert just a couple weeks later. Lord knows what's happened in this bozo since then, but we really need to be doing some kind of punishment to clowns who think this is good content. But regarding that whole situation, because it did lead to all these jokes that, oh, look at Revo having to be a bodyguard and stepping up and all this other stuff. She said, and I quote, I think that we haven't really come to terms with the insidious nature of how we view black women. And I'm sure people will read this and think, oh, for goodness sake, it's not about that. But it is, because that's what was being made fun of. It was my physique. It was my shape. It was the fact that I was bald. It was about what I look like. And because of that, there was this assumption that I was bigger than my co-star. And so I had to be controlling or protecting. And that was my role. I would hazard a guess that it would not have been the same had it been the other way around. Now, I did want to address this here that I will say, because I think I'm kind of guilty of this, is that when this situation happened, I did like make not jokes at at least to me, it didn't come off what I wanted it to be, was jokes at expenses or at Cynthia, as so much as just commentary on she seems to be the one who's doing the job compared to the crap security they had there. And she stepped up and took and defended her friend. And I said that in a way as from the standpoint of that I thought it was admirable that she stepped up and did that. So I can't really speak to how she felt regarding that. Maybe she felt that it was comments about her physique, and I guess she feels like maybe they were trying to sort of um I mean, I don't know what the correct word would be for the opposite of the emasculating. But I guess the opposite of emasculating for a woman, because obviously Cynthia's she's got a physique. She is bald. She's of the queer community and such like that. But I wouldn't say that was my intention when I said stuff like that, but it is something to keep in mind with that she said. I thought that was interesting and a takeaway. Though I will say that there was there was this episode during the Wicked in the lead up to the Wicked film, the first one, where she was really angry and complaining that someone tried to like mess with the poster that was kind of doing a homage to the original Broadway poster. And because in the original Broadway poster, her character's smiling and not really showing her face. But in the new poster, you could see her face and she wasn't really smiling. She was just looking very serious. And somebody did an edit where it didn't show her face as much. She was smiling more in it, and she took offense to that, which I thought she did overreact there. It was clearly an edit to match the Broadway poster more. Of course, I also don't know if they just did that because they didn't want to, spoiler alert for anybody who, for some reason, hasn't seen these two big event films already. The Wicked for Good ends with a homage to the Broadway spoiler. I'm not the Broadway spoiler, the Broadway poster. And maybe didn't want to give too much away and made it try to be a little bit different. I don't know, but I that is something that I guess I'll have to keep in mind. that she said there. I definitely don't like it if someone tries to emasculate me. So I I I I have to try to be respectful of that. But because I was involved in going on social media and talking about her having to go into bodyguard mode, but I didn't mean in the connotation that she seemed to believe that other people might have. Now this is the part that I found really interesting. Regarding how the incident affected her Oscar campaign for Wicked for Good, she said, and I quote, I just felt like my humanity had been bastardized. I felt like something I did instinctively have been made to be something that it simply was not because of the way people see women who look like me and because of the assumptions that are made. And I just didn't want to be a part of that, really and truly. I didn't want to put myself through it, and I didn't feel like I deserved it. She also added it didn't help that it felt like there was already a sort of upturned nose at the second installment, even though we all knew there was a second film coming and we were just doing our jobs. Um, this is probably where I'm going to have the most comments made, like I promised, with the weekly digest that should have been published yesterday, at least yesterday as of the publishing date for this podcast, because I'm recording this before the weekly digest is even out. But I promise in the weekly digest I will get a little bit more in depth about this on the podcast itself. And I do think I wanted to address because I think that one of the various things that hurt the Wicked for Good campaign, and there's a lot of things that you can bring up. The film was not panned as much as there was sort of this belief and conversation like that it was. The movie ended up in the 60s on Rotten Tomatoes. On average, about 6 out of 10 critics still liked the movie. Um, the movie ended up in the 50s on Metacritic, which means that overall the average score was still on the above 50-50. The audience scores for the movie were good, but they were not anywhere near as euphoric as the first movies. The first movies had amazing audience scores. Even the letterbox folks who were like turning their noses up at Wicked. Even with all that, the movie still has a 3.8 on there. And I wouldn't be surprised if that number goes up to like 3.9 in a couple years after all the awards discourse fades away about that movie. There the movie still ended up having divisive reviews, okay, but not great audience scores. That didn't help. The movie didn't do as good as the first movie at the box office. Didn't have strong legs. Still made over $500 million, but it didn't get the first movie came close to 800 million in comparison. Um, the movie was not pushed among critic regionals with the exception of makeup, costumes, production design, which that was getting into regionals all over the place. There were even regionals that weren't pushing Grande, which frustrated the hell out of me as someone who Grande was my personal winner. I mean, if to be frank with you, if I had it my way, Ariana Grande should have won the Oscar back to back. If in the Louis A. Mendez Awards, Ariana Grande won supporting actress in back to back years. Um and so that didn't help. And the movie was showing weakness even after it was getting some early support among some areas. Like for instance, it got into Critics' Choice, but it went from a movie that had like 11 noms, I think, the last time around to 7 noms. Like it didn't even get into sound at CCA, which was crazy. And then the Golden Globes did what the new Golden Globes does. They are a much more highbrow, dare I say, snobbish group. I think that there has been a little bit too far of a swing the other way from fixing the issues with the old Globes with that group, and that hurt the movie. Even though, ironically, the movie actually ended up getting more nominations this time, the second time around with the Globes than the first time around. So that didn't help. Um, and I mean, heck, even at HCA, where the first movie won Best Picture, like it got 14 noms. It showed up all over the place, but it didn't get a director nom even after HCA voted for Chu for director last year. And it only escaped with a VFX win and a supporting actress comedy win. I honestly think had HCA not divided their acting categories like they used to, um, I don't think Grande would have won. I think it would have been Madigan. But all that stuff didn't help. And I do think that something happened at the turn of the calendar year because the movie, like, it was showing up in some major places at the beginning. It Grande was kind of getting in everywhere, and Cynthia got into some places in with the regionals. Um, I remember there was even like Grande actually was the runner up, tied for the runner up in Central Florida. The Central Florida Critics group that I belong to, and and she won for the second year in a row. She actually won Iowa, so there was that. But the problem is that as the turn of the year happened, clearly I believe voters started catching up with some of these more international titles. And last year, international cinema was so stacked, and in particular with the Neon Five, that I think suddenly you start to see this feeling like we don't have to do this again. We don't have to check this off again. We've got these new titles we like more. We already did all these things for this movie the year before. So all those things did not help. But I as someone who never bought the argument that Cynthia stopped campaigning because of her preparing for her one woman Dracula show, this Variety interview says everything that I suspected. If you remember the 2024 campaign season, that Wicked cast was everywhere, and they were competing with the Conclave cast for who did everybody seem to want to hang out with. Honora had the big discovery and this movie that the consensus ended up getting around. But in terms of the cast people wanted to hang out with, that clearly was like the Wicked cast and the Conclave cast. And Wicked and Conclave were battling in the regionals for best ensemble. On top of Sing Sing. Sing Sing also did well in the regionals with ensemble, but their cast didn't emerge as the cast people wanted to hang out with and react to and keep shouting out and want to take pictures to at the award shows. My eye and what I saw and what I and certain people who were at shows and stuff told me Conclave and Wicked were the two groups, and SAG ensemble basically came down to those two, and Conclave eventually won that. In comparison, a year later in 2025, it really was kind of just Ariana all by herself. And then she stopped once she didn't get the Oscar nomination. Like, she didn't show up for her SAG, as a SAG nominee, she didn't show up for the SAG Awards. And I honestly don't blame her. Like, at that point, it's not a big deal to skip that. I really think the bad juju and this sort of feeling that I think they caught on early that this movie was not going to be as well received as the first movie led a lot of the cast to not even get involved. And it wasn't the same magic. And Cynthia not being there with Ariana, where Cynthia didn't even show up for the Golden Globes where she was nominated. I think that hurt the movie a lot. I think it made it feel a lot lesser. And of course, on top of the fact that we went from campaigning the first movie from, hey, this is I talked about this a little bit with Dune 3's awards chances for Best Picture earlier. We went from, hey, this is a West Side Story style awards contender that you can be proud of, to, hey, this is a big IP franchise, and we're slapping Wicked for Good on crock pots and dishwasher pods and look, here's Cynthia and Ariana doing stuff for NBC for the Winter Olympics, and here's Jeff Goldblum being the wizard show you how they have this AI tool to control the entire house and all that stuff. Like they really lean into the consumerism in the second one compared to the first one, and the only little legitimate campaigning that I saw was a private concert hosted by Baz Luhrmann with John Chu there, where Ariana and Cynthia were there to sing, and it was everything that I heard was that it was an extremely well received private event. If they did more of that, I'm not saying that Wicked for Good gets into Best Picture, but I do wonder. Like I don't think it blanks. I don't think it has the epic crash out that will forever haunt me living through that nominations morning. But yeah, I just wanted to address this, and I really hope for Cynthia's case and Ariana's too. That now that the whole looming shadow of Wicked and this discourse of is this awards worthy and this is overrated, this is awesome, this is and all that stuff. I really hope as they move on to other projects and stuff, and they they can be successful, because as far as I was concerned, Cynthia was my runner up in back to back years. She was a runner up for me for Demi in 24 and to Jessie Buckley in 25. She also was very underrated for her incredible performance as Elphaba. But yeah, I just wanted to address this because it really confirmed a lot of my personal feelings of some of the things that led to the absolute disaster that ended up being the awards campaign for Wicked for Good. And I think once Cynthia felt that way, that she started backing out of not being part of the campaign, in hindsight, that might have been the beginning of the end. It appears we now have writers for Paddington 4, and one of them happens to be Armando Iannucci, who wrote and directed The Death of Stalin, one of 2018's best films, if you ask me, though it was a 2017 film for British audiences. And this really did make me kind of sit up in my chair, because the third installment to the Paddington films, Paddington in Peru, was one of my favorites from last year, but it wasn't received nearly as enthusiastically as the first two films. And look, I found it to be a great comfort food movie, but it definitely paled in comparison to its predecessors. And I do hope that this next installment can recapture some of that magic of the first two films, especially that second film. And it's a tall order, don't get me wrong, but Iannucci, he knows how to write. He's well versed in comedy, and he's made some incredible. He was. I think he did. I think it was named. He did this like BBC series. I think it's called The Thick of It, that I haven't seen, but it's generally well regarded. He also directed the most recent David Copperfield film adaptation that I really liked. I just had certain issues with some of the adaptation choices it made. But the Death of Stalin is one of my favorite films of 2010s. Definitely of its year. And I'm really, really curious to see what he can bring to the table. Now, he's also working with the other writer who, unfortunately, I don't have their name in front of me, but they wrote Veep, which is a series that I have not watched. I've seen a few clips here or there, but obviously it was a massive success on HBO back during the late 2000s to 2010s. And I'm really curious to see if they can bring that magic back, because again, I really, really liked Paddington in Peru, but it was such a step down in comparison to the masterpieces of the first two movies. And word is that they want to do a fourth and a fifth film, and then that's it. If you're going to do a fourth and a fifth film, at the very least, I want you to kind of step your game up and try to really, get close to, if not even match, the measuring stick that was the first two movies. Well, it appears as well that the rumor making the rounds is that Simon Kinberg's upcoming Star Wars trilogy, uh, it might secretly be a plan to deliver episodes 10, 11, and 12 in regard to the main Skywalker saga of the franchise. And I really hope this isn't true, because I'm someone who, I'm one of those who came to loathe how the sequel trilogy turned out. I mean, you want to talk about a mess? Like, Force Awakens is one of the best films of 2015. Last Jedi, it has its defenders, and God bless you, folks. But then I think that thing is a massive mess of what happens when you're not having good communication between creatives on what to do, what's the third line in the franchise from start to finish. And I will say that there's been some claims that there are certain notes that Ryan Johnson was given that actually match some of the more controversial choices that he made. But even then, it doesn't change the fact that I have a lot of story and character arc issues with that movie. And then, of course, you get the giant fan service mess that is, Rise of Skywalker. And I really, really have a lot of issues with that sequel trilogy. And the thing is, like, I don't even think that episodes 8 and 9 are bad movies. They're just like very middling and forgettable. Like, like if I were Rotten Tomatoes certified, I would put them fresh, but barely would I consider either fresh. Just in terms of the like, well, they'll do the job entertaining whoever watches them for the most part. Um, but yeah, I was not a fan of the sequel trilogy, and I don't see why we should return to the Skywalker story rather than explore other corners of this galaxy this series is set in. But with the recent box office stumbles, I Mandalorian Grogu, I liked it, but the movie actually, people keep acting like this movie has awful reviews. The movie has okay reviews, and the audience scores are okay, but it's not doing that great at the box office. And with those recent stumbles, I do fear Disney may become even more convinced that this is the way forward by leaning into nostalgic, safer stuff like this. And I have to say, blame whoever you want to blame. I think people should just share blame instead of trying to point fingers on who to fault. I think the Star Wars franchise at the moment is in a very, very rough position where it does not know what it is and what it wants to be. And speaking of Star Wars, Marcia Lucas, George Lucas's ex-wife, who helped reshape what was originally a poorly received cut of the original 1977 Star Wars into the beloved classic it became, has passed away at the age of 80. She won an Oscar for editing the film and also worked on classics such as Taxi Driver and Return of the Jedi. Apparently, she did not do Empire. She did not edit Empire Strikes Back, which I can kind of understand, given that her and George were probably starting to get on the downside of their marriage. But hey, Return of the Jedi came out about the time that divorce was finalized. So, but one could argue, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to highlight her in particular. One could argue she saved Star Wars because, in particular, the trench run apparently was very confusing to people in the way that the original cut had it. There were folks cracking jokes at a private screening for it. I believe there's a story that Brian De Palma was going off on Lucas about how badly put together the film was, the first cut, and she came in and she saved this movie. And whether you're a Star Wars person or not, whether you believe the first movie is a great sci-fi film or overrated, whatever it is, she saved it. She won an Oscar for editing the film, and she basically I mean, you could argue that she deserves just as much credit as George Lucas for Star Wars. And I'm sorry to anybody out there who's going to take offense to that, but it just goes to show you how important a good editor is. And there's a saying, I forgot who was the directors that said it, but there's a saying that you finish shooting the movie, now it's time to edit the movie, and that's when you really start making the movie. But rest in peace to Marcia Lucas. Um, you know, she will forever, ever be beloved by Star Wars fans for saving that first movie and you know, from becoming a laughing stock. Uh, And now it's time to look at the past weekend at the box office and beyond. This past weekend's box office champion was Backrooms, the A24 horror film based on the viral YouTube series. It broke records both for the distributor's biggest opening and for its young director's debut. He's now the youngest director to make the money that this film made. I think it made over 80 million just worldwide on opening weekend. The movie was a hit with critics and liked, but not loved by audiences. Among critics, Atlanta at an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes, with a 77 Metacritic score, with audiences that ended up with a 74% popcorn meter score, 3.04 on Letterboxd, 7.1 on IMDb, and just a B minus cinema score. So, interesting situation where critics and audiences like it, but clearly critics liked it more than audiences. And I just wanted to note real quick because I didn't write a full review for this thing. I didn't even mention it earlier in the podcast, and it is arguably the movie of the weekend. But I personally was not a fan of this movie. It had some great production design and legitimately eerie moments, but it bordered on pretentious at times for me. The character writing was clunky, and the finale lost a lot of the momentum the movie was trying to build toward. And I'll tell you what, with the exception of 28 years later, The Bone Temple, um, me and horror have not been getting along very well this year compared to last year, where like I had two horror films in my top five and a third one in my top 20 overall. So I don't know what to say. I was not a fan of this Obsession, and I was not a fan of Backrooms. Focused Features, meanwhile, has a counter programming release with Pressure, starring Brendan Fraser, Andrew Scott, and Kerry Condon as historical figures that try to plan for D-Day. And this ended up doing about as well as a small British film could do. I believe it made about 6 million domestically on opening weekend. I did think it missed its window for a better box office. I had it released over more Memorial Day weekend last weekend, but I guess Star Wars scared focus away, which in hindsight it shouldn't have. Anyhow, the film got solid reviews from critics and an even warmer reception from audiences. With critics, Atlanta at an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 69 Metacritic score, with audiences that earned a 95% popcorn meter score, a 3.5 on Letterboxd, a 7.7 on IMDb, and the rare A cinema score. And this is a trend that we tend to see with these kind of movies. These British films that uh, Focus Features gets out here to the States, that where they seem to attract a lot of the older audiences. And critics generally like the movie, but they don't love the movie. But audiences really, really like the movie, and I can see why, because it is a crowd pleaser. Even though it's a tense 2-hour film, it is a crowd pleaser, and it leaves on a generally high emotional note that will make most people leave with a smile on their face. And I watched this on a Saturday evening in a pretty well attended screening, made up of mostly older moviegoers, like I said, and it definitely played well with that crowd. And I'll say, as a history nerd with a fondness for dad movies, especially now since I am a dad, I thoroughly enjoyed watching people who can stand one another try to figure out the weather plans for arguably the most important battle in human history. I really, really like this movie. If this movie does not end up even at least on like the tail end of my top 20 at the end of the year, then we probably have some really, really good stuff coming toward come award season. Um Meanwhile, John Carney's music-based comedy Power Ballad had a limited opening, so I haven't gotten around to it. And both its critical and audience scores have so far been generally solid, but nothing dynamite. Among critics, it landed at an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 67 Metacritic score, with audiences is currently sitting at a 3.3 on Letterboxd and a 7.0 on IMDb. And like I said, I'll be catching up with this one in due time at my leisure. It should be releasing pretty close to my market in the coming week or two. Meanwhile, outside of the box office, we have Propeller One Way Night Coach, John Travolta's directorial debut, and it premiered on Apple TV to mixed and negative reactions. Among critics, it landed on a 54% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 48 Metacritic score, with audiences that earned a 2.8 on Letterboxd and a 5.6 on IMDb. And I, for one, found this to be an okay, middling, but cute little movie. Perhaps because maybe it was because I just became a dad, and there's been discussion online with me and my followers on X that me just becoming a dad, is it affecting certain movies that I'm taking in this year? But look, watching this little boy and his mom connect during this flight and the wonderment that he got of it, and I'm someone who's like, you couldn't pay me to fly, so even I like just there was just this element to this little 1 hour quick little movie that I found to be charming, even though it's not anything great. So I can understand why some people just find this to be a forgettable, mediocre film. But I don't know. It generally worked for me, But hey, it is what it is. Everybody's got subjective taste. And what about this upcoming next weekend at the box office and beyond? And after an 80s attempt to bring a live action He Man to the silver screen, we will be getting another shot with Masters of the Universe, which incidentally has been receiving some pretty decent reactions coming out of its world premiere just last week. Even so, it doesn't look like my market is getting a press screening, so I have to see this one with my own hard-earned dollars. I'm hoping this is a fun and pleasant surprise. I did see someone compare it to the Dungeons and Dragon movie that we got a couple years ago, which that was a fun, pleasant surprise movie. I thought it was a pretty enjoyable movie. Um, Meanwhile, we'll also be getting Scary Movie, which is basically the sixth film in the satire franchise. It will be attempting to capture the kind of legacy sequel magic at the box office that films like the 2018 Halloween and Scream 5 pulled off. This is looking like the movie that will end up with the biggest box office haul of the weekend, and I have to admit, I am not the biggest fan of this franchise. I can't say I've liked any of the previous films, and the marketing has left me wanting, as it seems to be leaning more toward appealing the MAGA chuds and its traditional younger and more urban fan base. And I will say I have seen some stuff in this marketing that has made me roll my eyes. Like, this is not 2022, 2023. Things have shifted, folks. People are tired of DEI jokes. People are tired of anti-trans jokes. Like, we could do better here. Um, the you know, to be fair though, I wasn't too crazy about the Naked Gun films either, and I ended up really enjoying last year's Legacy sequel for that. So I'll try to have an open mind, but the film isn't screening for critics in my market either. So I'll probably be watching this with a crowd that will. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up liking it more than I do. But hey, maybe like I said, I'll try to keep an open mind. Maybe it'll be this year's Naked Gun for me. Carolina Caroline is a Bonnie and Clyde style crime drama that was getting some raves at last year's fall festivals and serves as indie distributor Magnolia's summer counter programming. I'll be catching this one at my leisure, and I hope it's as good as folks say. But it will finally be hitting theaters, so the public outside of the film festivals can see it this weekend. Outside of the box office, Office Romance is the big straight to streaming release for the upcoming weekend via Netflix. A romantic centered on Jennifer Lopez and Brett Goldstein. Netflix is hoping it can make some noise. I'm just gonna pray that the movie is like a B minus at the very least, because 9 out of 10 times these movies are C plus super forgettable films. And in regard to what else is on my mind that is not film related, the NBA finals are all set as the New York Knicks, who finished 53-29, will go toe to toe with the San Antonio Spurs, who finished 62-20. This is a rematch of 1999 when they then, burgeoning Spurs dynasty took on a veteran Knicks squad coming off a decade of struggling to get past the Chicago Bulls. The Spurs won that matchup in 5 games, and the rest was history. And, this time around, it's 2 young squads that could be on the verge of becoming dynasties. The Spurs are being led by potential future multiple-time MVP in Wemby, who, by the way, just ended the Oklahoma City Thunder's repeat bid. I don't have any hate for these franchises as is, but I will say the Knicks having President Trump and WWE's cringe comedy act Danhausen. Sorry, I am not under the psychosis people are and find that guy funny. I find him incredibly frustrating to watch. With these guys in their corner, it does make me lean towards rooting for the Spurs. But regardless whether who I root for, my official prediction is Spurs in 5. But we also have the Stanley Cup Finals, and those are also set with the Carolina Hurricanes, who finished 53-29, and the Golden Knights from Vegas, who finished 39-43, going at it. This is an interesting one because the Hurricanes have built a team that could potentially take over from the Florida teams, my Lightning and the Florida Panthers, as the new force in the East. However, their opponents are previous champions who have fought and clawed their way here after losing more games than they won, taking advantage of a weak division and the NHL's point system, which I am not a fan of the NHL point system. This thing of, if you lose in overtime, we'll give you half a point for that and all that crap. That's why you heard me refer to the Hurricanes record as 53-29 and the Golden Knights as 39-43. No, I don't. You either win a game or you lose a game, and I wish the NHL did that. But look, they took advantage of the point system. They made the playoffs, and they've gone on a run, and that included sweeping the President's Trophy recipient, the Colorado Avalanche. And this is interesting because the Golden Knights, on paper, should have plenty of experience on their side. But they did stumble into the playoffs. Like these guys lost more games than they won during the regular season. And the Hurricanes seem like this well-built team that could potentially be on a run the next couple years. My head keeps telling me to predict the Hurricanes, but something is pulling me towards predicting the Golden Knights. So I am predicting the Golden Knights in 6 games. Oh, and I'll do it on a stacked episode of the Mendez Movie Report Podcast. Remember once again that if you want to check out more of my work, you can visit mendezmoviereport.com or find me on all social media, whether it be Letterboxd, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Reddit, or even Award Expert and Gold Derby or under Mendez Movie RPT. And if you wanted to email me, just catch me at author, as in a writer, authorlmendez@gmail.com. Until next time, God bless. And do me a favor, go watch a great movie for me.